Welcome to WineLink's video. We're partnering with GreatWineNews these days to bring you interesting stories, information about viticulture, and other associated wine lifestyles around the globe. And my name's Bousfield, and I thank you for joining us today. Today's special guest is Simon Gears, a native South African who's been part of the South African wine industry now for some 13 years. And Simon, nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Nice to be here.
Welcome to GreatWineNews.
All right. I think I have a lot of information about the South African wine industry, but I'll keep it nice and short and succinct if I can. Not many people are aware that even South Africa makes wines. I get that all the time. Oh, South Africa makes wines. Little known is that South Africa is one of the oldest winemaking industries outside of the Mediterranean or the European winemaking countries. The winemaking part of South Africa is right down in the southwestern corner, right down at the tip of South Africa. It sits just south of the Tropics of Capricorn on around about the 35-degree latitude. And the importance of that is mainly because it's in line with central Peru and the Australian vineyards. And it so happens that South Africa happens to be one of the only 5 ideal climates for growing grapes, Mediterranean-style climate. So, of course, everybody knows Europe around the Mediterranean. There's Morocco, and then you've got Napa in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, you've got, as I mentioned, you've got Peru, central Peru, South Africa, and Australia. South Africa's wine industry goes way back to the late 1600s, when the French Huguenots actually settled in South Africa. And in order to make a living, they started the winemaking industry. In the same time, the Dutch East India Company were sailing their boats from Europe to South Africa around the Cape of Good Hope and then on to the Middle East to do trade. On their way back, they'd pick up the wine from South Africa and do the trading in Europe. So people like Napoleon have had South African wines and stuff like that. So traditionally, as Americans see it, they haven't seen South African wines like Europe has. So Europe is the biggest market for South African wines. Unfortunately for South Africa, it's gone through a tumultuous stage with its wines, going back from historical as well as political issues that occurred in South Africa. The biggest is that way back, apartheid, everybody is aware of apartheid, but going back into the 1925s, around about there, the government set up a cooperative called KWV. Basically, it's a Dutch name standing for Cooperative of Farmers Associations. And they were granted the sole export rights for all South African wines. And if you take South Africa comprises around about 4,500 wineries or vineyards, of which there are only really 350 that actually make wine. The others supply to the cooperatives. So you've got the 80-20 rule in South Africa in terms of making wine. 20% of the big cooperatives make 80% of the wine. 80% make 20% of the wine. And that's where I'm involved, on the boutique wines, family-owned vineyards, really nice, classy wines. But going back to the apartheid, the issues with the apartheid and KWV and the restrictions, the smaller vineyards couldn't then export. So your style of wine and that then gets made specifically for the local market. Part of that as well is sanctions were imposed against South Africa in the late 80s, early 90s, because of political issues. So when South Africa was trying to break into the US market, they were prevented because of sanctions. And it was only because of 1994, when the government changed, when apartheid was abolished and the new government came into power, that all the other vineyards were allowed to then start exporting, because at the same time, the monopoly of export was removed from that big cooperative called KWV.
So thank you, Simon.
It's a pleasure.
And on behalf of WineLink's video, this is Graham Bousfield partnering with GreatWineNews. And thank you for joining us today.